In this video, we are going to learn how to navigate programmatically using React Router version 5. Usually, for a user to navigate around your application, you need to render some link components from React Router, which the user can click. It is the most common way and the one you should use the most in your application. However, sometimes you need to navigate the user to a new location without clicking on an actual link, but when he has performed a specific action in your app. That's when programmatic navigation is necessary. For example, you would probably want to redirect your user to a different page after he has successfully registered or signed in to your application. Let's actually take this example and implement it. First, I'm creating a new React component called sign-in, which is the component that renders the signing page of our application. In that component, we can render a form that the user must complete to sign in. Then, we set the onSubmit prop, pass an event handler to it, and define it above. This event handler is the function that handles the sign-in logic, and this is where we want to take our user to the new location after he has been signing successfully. There are actually two ways we could do that. The first one is by using the declarative way of redirecting in React Router by leveraging the React useState hook and creating a new state variable, let's say to dashboard. This is where we want to redirect our user, and set its initial value to false. Then, if the user is successfully signed in, we update the state variable and set its value to true. Next, down below, we could check this state variable, and if it's true, we return the redirect component from React Router DOM and set the new location to /dash. So if the user has been authenticated successfully after submitting the form, the state of the sign-in component is updated and it renders again, but with the redirect component, which redirects the user to the dashboard page. Otherwise, the form is rendered onto the screen. What is interesting about this approach is that it aligns nicely with the mental model of React, where we update the component state on a user action, which causes the component to re-render. And instead of showing some UI, we render a redirect component that navigates the user to the dashboard route. However, the downside of this approach is that we need to have an extra state variable in our component to perform the navigation. There is nothing bad about it, but React routers offer another way of programmatically navigating between routes that avoid creating that extra piece of state and rendering a redirect component. This second approach uses the imperative way of navigating with React Router by using the useHistory hook from React Router DOM. So we can remove our previous state variable and retrieve the history instance by calling the useHistory hook inside our component. Then we can replace our state update with history.push and passing in the new location /dash. This will push this new entry onto the history stack and therefore perform the redirection to the dashboard page. We could also use the replace method if we'd like to replace the current entry on the history stack instead of pushing a new one. But let's come back to the push method for our example. Finally, we can get rid of the redirect component here. And that's all. As you can see, this second approach of programmatically navigating with React Router is more straightforward and intuitive. It uses the history module from React Router without dealing with any extra piece of state and without having to render any redirect component.